Hello, and thank you very much for allowing me to contribute to the seminar today. The first research framework included a set of recommendations which were considered still relevant in the 2016 review, being restated, proposing, amongst other things, the need to engage with relevant research on early medieval material culture elsewhere in Britain and Ireland, and setting this evidence from Wales within a wider context. It recognised that there have been increasing opportunities to address broader issues, including establishing a hierarchy of secular settlement sites in a broader landscape, and analysing chronological and regional differences. And it also pointed out the need to continue to construct better understanding of the economy, organisation and exploitation of land and resources, of course, impact of climate and other changes in the landscape, craftworking and mechanisms of exchange and trade. These goals are still relevant to future research priorities, and today I'll summarise some of the progress in two areas: portable antiquities and crafts. The Portable Antiquities Scheme exists for the advancement of knowledge through the recording of finds of archaeological material and the sharing of that knowledge. The PAS scheme in Wales, or PAS Cymru, currently funded through an equal partnership between Amgueddfa, Cymru, Mald and Cadw, is a prominent example of cross-heritage bodies working in collaboration, a Welsh Government priority. The outreach, engagement, advice and skill-sharing work of PAS Cymru staff and volunteers contribute to delivering on a number of wider cross-sector objectives, priorities and agendas. There are about 39,571 early medieval records on the PAS database, and that was on the previous slide. Since its inception in Wales in 1999, more than 62,200 artefacts from within its border have been recorded on the database. The Treasure Act 96 applies to England and Wales, and over 570 cases of treasure have been reported in Wales between 1997 and the middle of this year, of which about 77 cases, or 13%, were early medieval, forming a growing cultural resource. Voluntary reporting by detectorists is now adding significant finds to the database. Some metalwork was produced in Anglo-Saxon England, but their final ownership lay within the kingdoms of Wales, notably with some examples, Gwynedd and Morgannwg, the objects having been repurposed and given new meaning. Many later finds display a range of cultural affinities with Ireland, England, and the Scandinavian world, providing links to the archaeology of those areas as well. In a forthcoming paper in Archaeology Comprensis, I've reviewed early medieval artefacts from selected areas in South East Wales predominantly, and explored whether they can be used to make inferences regarding the location of archaeological sites. Some items were reported through the creation of Portable Antiquities Scheme. Some lie within the South Wales focus of the research of others, such as Andy Seaman's work, and some items are described fully for the first time. Similar reviews of the Western and North Wales evidence is in preparation. In studying the evidence, I took account of the analysis of PAS datasets in England, and notably Daubney divided, by way of example, Middle Saxon assemblages and their densities for Lincolnshire, much of which was high-grade agricultural land, into three classes: low activity areas having produced between 1 and 10 objects, medium activity areas 11 to 20 artifacts, high activity areas 21 or more artifacts. Three sources of information have been used: an internal database of early medieval finds from Wales since 1987, reports to coroners on cases of potential treasure, and information on the PAS database, which includes treasure. Some general observations can be made from the limited number of finds made so far. Most were initially reported as single, apparently isolated finds, Cumulative reporting now points to at least 7 sites within the study area which have produced more than one find. The average number of early medieval finds being reported before the introduction of PAS in Wales is 1.75 per annum, quite small. From 1999, this has risen to an average of 4, again still very slow, but it is on the increase. Since 1996, there have been 570 treasure cases in Wales, and of these, about 13% have been early medieval. This is fluid, of course, and the totals are changing every month. A rough comparison of finds for the period 1988 to 99 shows a total of 17 non-treasure finds from the south and 1 from North Wales. Since 1999, 41 examples were from South Wales and 9 from North Wales, all the latter since the appointment of Dr. Susie White, PAS Cymru Finds Officer based in Wrexham. Just to look at 4 areas, the Llandaw-Llysworni group is characterised by unassociated, isolated finds found within the hinterland of the Caput at Llysworni and the village of Llandaw. You see some of the objects there on the right, including a strap union with Salon-style decoration, style 2, later modified, found to the northeast of Llysworni. And coins include a penny of William I, found 600 or odd metres from the strap union. There's a penny of Athelstan from close to Llysworni, towards Colwinston. 2009, a 10th century copper alloy strap end was found east of Llandaw. And in the following year, a 9th century copper alloy pseudo-penannular brooch terminal was found in a field between Llysworni and Llandaw. Like the previous object, it had been modified during its life. While these are at present isolated finds, they represent an interesting gravitation of satellite find spots in the hinterland of the Llys and may relate to the polyfocal nature of settlement in the area. A cluster of objects found on different occasions on rising ground in the Bolverton community, southeast of Llantwit Major, also point to early medieval activity between the 8th and 10th centuries. The earliest object is a small 8th century copper alloy penannular brooch terminal found in 2019 on a rise between the coast and a lower area which produced later pre-Norman coins. The penny of Athelstan I of East Anglia, portrait type, was found in 2016, about 300 metres from the brooch. On the lower ground, at least 6 coins have been reported so far to the Portable Antiquities Scheme. 4 are marked on the map there in the bottom right. So I've mentioned the Athelstan coin, the possibility of 8th, 9th century zone of activity in the higher land. But this is complicated because we have a fragmentary 9th century stiker reported just to the northeast of one of the later coins available in the Confessor, number 7 on the map. Later coins were all found on slightly lower land, closer to Bolverton itself, and die linkage between the pennies of Edward the Confessor leave open the question of whether some may have formed the contents of a conquest period purse. To the north of Cabridge lies Penllyn Moor, and the two complete penannulars are fairly well known, both 8th or 9th century aristocratic versions of early brooches. The complete and silver copper alloy penannular brooches appear to have been casual losses in the boggy land flanking the river. But the smaller and top right, incomplete silver penannular brooch, you can see the front and the back there, was found on high ground close to Penllyn Court, which sits on a rise at the 84-metre contour overlooking Newton Moor. This raises the possibility of an elite site on sloping ground in the vicinity of a defended promontory enclosure discovered in 2010. It's generally suspected that the evidence for pre-Norman activity, as we know, may lie beneath existing village settlements. And if you look at St. Arvan's, you've got the parish church with its 10th century or early 11th century slab bearing the iconography of the resurrection and ascension. And in addition to the 3 finds to the west, which have been well reported, we have the latest find is a rectangular mount with crudely cut, debased foliage decoration in cast relief. It's a very simple but slight strap slide in terms of function, and in a more elaborate version in terms of its decoration, with some debased Carolingian style strap slides, such as examples from Skerpenbeck, East Riding of Yorkshire, and an example in Kent. But it's significant because the discovery suggests that the zone of early medieval activity could extend to the north and east of the church, beneath the present village, and more work is needed. Here are just a few of the finds that you may remember from over the years, recent years, including finds from Anglesey and Milford Haven area. And at the very bottom, a lead weight capped with a cut fragment of insular enamel metalwork found in 2014 at Goldsland near Wenvo in the Vale. And there's also now a newly reported flattened arm ring from Oakenholt in Flintshire, not on the map, similar to this is the position of Cresselly, the Cresselly arm ring hoard found over a period of 5 years, also flattened arm rings of Norse type, Scandinavian type, rather like the Huxley hoard. There's also been an ongoing survey of ring pins from Wales nearing completion. That'll go to publication. In summary, much of the slender evidence for early medieval metalwork suggests that it's being found on high-grade agricultural land, which often is the detected land. Most concentrations of artifacts are low activity areas if we were to use the English Daubney categorization. The situation is, I think, a little different in Wales. There are two clear benefits of the Portable Antiquities Scheme. Firstly, the identification of previously unseen material culture, and secondly, an indication of early medieval activity of different intensities at specific locations. While much evidence for the early medieval settlement remains conjectural, we've got the evidence from St. Albans and Porthcasseg nearby, suggesting foci of activity underlying existing settlement. Sully, I haven't mentioned, there's evidence there suggesting a possible shift from the vicinity of home or cog farm in the early medieval period to Cosmeston in terms of activity, with its establishment of a new manor house by de Constantin family in the 12th century. Finds of coins or hoards from South Wales before 1066 are also thin on the ground, though the concurrence with early medieval artifacts in several cases may help to refine the location of settlement activity. The current database shows a significant increase in coin use post 850, a recent example being a silver penny of Edward the Elder from Caldicot in Monmouthshire. Of course, the topography of and advantageous sea routes for trade and communication go a long way to explain the distribution of examples that have been found. Single coin finds are particularly informative if other contemporary material can be identified. In 2013, for example, an Anglo-Saxon skeet from around 690 to 710 was found at Caerwent, amplifying the evidence for early medieval activity within the town, published by Knight. Early medieval metalwork before AD 600 is still rare, and much more evidence is needed to flesh out this period. But it's clear that continuing support for the Portable Antiquities Scheme will be essential for such evaluations and new site recognition. I'd like to just thank Mark Lodwick and George Watley and Adele Bricking for their assistance in compiling this report. I was asked to mention crafts, so I'd like to just start by touching upon the review by Johan Kalmar of early medieval craft production and craftspeople in early medieval Northern Europe, where he defined 5 foci for craft studies. And these are the material chosen and how it was procured, the tools and other devices and how the different tools were used, the activities undertaken, reconstructing actions from waste material and tools, and an assessment of how activities may have been organized. For example, the work of a sire or master craftsman and crannog construction has been reviewed in the recent publication of Llangors. The fourth area concerns the skills base and the level of cognition, specific knowledge and learning required, and the transmission of ideas. Much of this is revealed by ongoing analysis of the products themselves, some reported through the Portable Antiquities Scheme and through reports to coroners under the Treasure Act 1996. These are being addressed in the preparation of the Amgueddfa publication to some extent, but it's worth reviewing some of the evidence itself. We look at the first category, materials, and third, activities undertaken. There has been progress. For example, in 2018, we saw the publication in Archaeology of the 2013 excavation of the enclosure at Llanfred, Ceredigion, which produced flow slag deposits analysed by Tim Young, one in a feature with the late 7th to 9th century radiocarbon date. The site also produced undiagnostic fragments of hearth furnace lining and a single large smithing hearth cake. These are significant and being further evidence for bloomery smithing slags on the smelting of bog iron ore. And there was an assessment of the likely source of nearby upland bogs by Tim, who pointed out that the technology of iron smelting remains uncertain, and further research is required, as the period shows a complex variation of approaches with time and location. The excavations at St. Patrick's Chapel, Whitesands, have produced significant quantities of waste material, globules and crucibles, some in residual burial contexts. Most of the metalworking evidence came from an area outside the entrance to an oval stone-built enclosure, which contained a central rectangular cenotaph or memorial similar to an Irish lyre. These features predate the cemetery and are 8th century date. It would seem that the charcoal layer with metalworking evidence was deposited over a very short period of time, perhaps a few weeks. I'm very grateful for Ken Murphy for the images and this update. Turning to the moulds that were found, many from residual grave contexts, all are only partially preserved, and the high degree of fragmentation has limited the identification of products cast. But all the diagnostic fragments appear to be two-piece bivalve moulds, and we've had a go at reconstructing from casts and so on, so that we can suggest that some of the products were plain circular mounts, curved edge mounts with projecting lugs, circular mounts with low relief moulding, and various uncertain forms and bosses. And we'll be comparing this evidence with that from other sites, including sites in Ireland of different types. Turning to the current programme of research in preparation for the Amgueddfa publication, there's a wide range of evidence for craft activities within the settlement, including the bases of bowl hearths set inside the rampart and operating in the 9th century. And you see a couple there. Their spatial arrangement provides clues on how activities may have been organised, and the associated structures with some are also of interest. Turning to metalwork itself, copper alloy working includes semi-worked ingots, as well as semi-manufactured copper alloy bars, some intentionally folded, splash drops of copper alloy from the casting process, runnels, casting sprue, including a casting sprue cone. Analysed waste includes pure copper, this is using XRF, and pure tin is also represented on the site, raising questions about the supply of raw materials. Gold or silver working evidence includes a scrap of lead sheet used in the press black method of impressing sheet metal, usually gold, with designs from a matrix or press model. The lead sheet or cushion is placed over the sheet metal to absorb the force of hammer blows applied to the top of the lead to complete a crisp repousse impression without damaging the comparatively soft precious metal. And you see an example of a press black design in copper alloy from Amgueddfa on the left. But we've also got splash drops of silver, and a lead trowel piece from possibly making silver arm rings. Lead casting waste has been found, solidified splashes and dribbles. We have a lead tin alloy ingot and a possible lead matrix for making an impression in a mould. And recycling of metalwork, some early examples, one from Pembrokeshire on the left, is also an important part of the process of craft production. We shouldn't be ignoring that. Ironwork, in terms of ironworking, of course, we've got the finished products themselves. We've also got billets, semi-forged iron bars, strips, some twisted, and so on. There's one bone weaving tablet to represent textile working, possibly of finer textile, but we have additional evidence in the form of weaving tools, temple claws, so we've got 8 of them. These are socketed iron pronged objects now recognized for the being slotted into pairs onto battens and used to stretch textile, woven on a 2-beam vertical loom. We've got needles, and of course we've got spindle whorls, many in lead, biconical and decorated, but also in other materials, stone and bone. We've got waste from antler working. Antler and bone is represented on the site. And here we've got some antler in situ within building 2. Offcuts show that complete antlers were sawn up on the site, making objects. And the waste includes an offcut from lathe-turned antler, tines with trimmed ends and surfaces vertically shaved with draw knives. Beam offcuts, one with a neat circular hollow core, possibly from being turned into a handle. And we've got bone offcuts as well, or possibly pin production. And here we see a large section of antler with cut marks suggesting it's been used as a chopping block. Stoneworking, I'll just flash this up to show that we haven't forgotten stoneworking is a very important aspect. We've been working with Jana Horak on geological sourcing of all the worked stone from Pembrokeshire. So I'd like just to, as my time has run out, to finish just summarizing some of the issues that arise in terms of formulating priorities. We've still got gaps in the archaeological record. We've only got small numbers where evidence exists. Small numbers, for example, of craft tools. We've got much to learn about the processes and manufacturing techniques involved, and PAS finds are contributing to this. We've got much to learn about craft worker in society. There needs to be far more scientific analysis of products, and we need to differentiate domestic and larger scale activities. Thank you very much for all my colleagues who've contributed in many respects to this review, and thank you very much for listening.